And I believe I can share my screen. So I'm going to do that. Here it is. So what I'm going to talk about is Mural. So Mural is something, maybe you've heard about it. It's one of many online whiteboards. So this applies to some other things. I've heard of Miro is one that I think the nursing school might use, and I've heard of Padlet. I can't compare and contrast them because I haven't used the other ones, but this is what I use. It's great because it's free. So it's not maybe obvious that it's free, but if you email them and say, hey, I'm an educator, I'd like an educational account, they'll give you an educational account for free. With I currently have, I think, 150 guests in mine, which is plenty for the students that I have. So I'm going to just demo this a little bit. This is actually a real mural that I was using less than an hour ago for one of my first classes. I always like to try to demo my technology. So this is what I call an orientation. And I just copied this from some of the templates they have. And this is just an orientation that shows them how to use it on the left-hand side, which I'm not going to go through in the interest of time right now. And then I have them over here and do this little exercise, which this goes through. It's a combination of helping them to practice using Mural and also introducing themselves to each other. So I use this in class, and what I do is I have them, I say I want them to relate to each other. Make a connection, right? So find something in someone else's job that you connect with, right? And so, like today, some students were talking about how we had several former military folks, a few people that had worked in golf jobs and stuff like that. And you can see that you can do a lot of things with this. So these are sticky notes that you can do. You can embed images. You can embed links, right? So that's what this is. So if you want to do a hyperlink, you can hyperlink a web page. You can embed PDFs. So there's all sorts of media that you can embed in here to kind of tell a story or to collaborate. And what I like about it is that it's a combination. It's sort of like a combination of your online whiteboard and Google Sheets, but with a lot more flexibility. And so let me show you, this is sort of an intro thing that I do, but let me show you something that's a little bit more pedagogical, which is this one. So this is what I call, this is an overview of my entire class, basically in visual form. And so I teach finance, so you might recognize this. This has to do with financial statements. But I talk about the different topics we're going to do. So this is topic 1, and then we move down here to topic 2 and 3 are down here at the bottom. They don't work, they're not going around in a clock circuit. It has to do with how this is set up. There's topic 4 and topic 5. And so I can talk through each of the different topics, and this is sort of a visual presentation of what we're going to be going through. And I tell them that over the course of the class, we're going to be adding sticky notes to this, and sort of it turns into sort of like a cheat sheet, right? Where they have formulas or they have important things that they want to remember, but they get to add it along the way. Mm. And then another exercise I did today over here on the right-hand side, you can see we did this earlier today. This is what's called a KWL, a know, a want, and a learn. So what do I know already? What do I want to learn? And what have I learned? So we did the first 2. So the bottom one is empty. So what have I learned? Obviously, we just had the first class, so that's not open yet. And so this is where they put some questions in there about what they want to learn, or I guess maybe some statements, I suppose, about what they want to learn, and things about what they already know. And so this has worked pretty well for me in terms of getting students to interact kind of in my synchronous sessions. One of the things I like about this is that it gets us away from staring at all these little boxes on the screen. And it kind of gets us sort of all on the same side, all looking at something else. Like the metaphor is sort of like sitting in a room and everybody's looking at the whiteboard. You're not looking at each other, you're all looking at the whiteboard instead. And I think that it's almost like it gives people a break instead of staring at each other in the screen. So that's weird. Like we don't normally do that, right? You don't sit in a meeting and like stare intently at each other's faces in the meeting, right? A lot of the times you're looking at your papers, or you're looking at the whiteboard that you're collaborating on, or you're looking at something else. And so it kind of gives people sort of a psychological break. The second question, I think I'm still on time. This one won't be as long actually. It's talking about how do I keep my students on track? And this is sort of a, I guess this is sort of an endorsement of the OCDI this summer, because I kind of just copied what they did, but it's worked really, really well, and I got great feedback on it, which is I just created modules for my course. So this is the same course that I was talking about that I ran at 12 o'clock today. It's my corporate valuation course. And so you can see here on the left-hand side, you can see like I literally have a section here that says classes, and here is class 1. And then here we are, right here in class 1. And I totally copied this from the OCDI, right? So here's what we're doing this module. Here's a little video entry talking about what the objectives and is. I put in here application, like what they're going to be doing, what their deliverables are. A little bit silly for today. Maybe we can look at something that has a little bit more to it. We'll jump down to class 4. So this is actually has some content, more content to it, talking about computing some metrics. They're going to be creating an Excel sheet, and here's what they should be doing to kind of keep track with what they're doing in groups. Here's what they need to do. They need to click through to read these topics in Top Hat. Here's another PDF that they need to click. Here's some practice where they're going to click this link and it's going to open an Excel spreadsheet. And then here's what they need to do. After they do that, they click on this, and this is the video of me going through that worksheet. And then we have a discuss. So open up a discussion module where they can answer these questions where it's intersecting what's going on with RH. It's a firm, it's Restoration Hardware. And kind of how do their metrics relate to the firm's business model. We talk a little bit about uncertainty. And then I always tell them when they get down to this where it says meet, once you've gotten to the meet thing, that means you're ready for class, right? So if you've done everything up and the next task is meet, that means it's time for us to meet together. And you can see here, this is links for Zoom and in person. And then I've got a reflection here at the end. But I've gotten some good feedback from students that they like this. It's very checklist-ish, where you just kind of go through and you do these things in order. And then you know that once you've done these things, you're ready for class. So that's it. Those are my 2 things.
Thank you so much. And I was planning to save questions until the end, but there are a couple of questions that I think you can probably tackle pretty quickly. Gosh.
Yeah, so I can do a couple of, so does Mural work well if you have in-person classes too? So the answer is yes, I think it works fine. The only issue I've had with that is if students sometimes like can't find it. It's nice in Zoom, I can just throw the URL in the chat and they click the URL and boom, it opens up. That's a little harder in person. So I've generally found that it works okay. And what I do is I create a room, what's called a room in Zoom for my class. And then there's sometimes multiple murals in that room. And once they have access to that room, which you can usually work out like in the first class, then everything else kind of flows from there. And Mural works pretty well in that you can go in and you can send an invite immediately from the interface. So you click invite. I won't do it now because I don't want to share my screen again, but you click invite and you can pull up their email address and click send invite and it goes right to their email. And that'll invite them to the room. So it works pretty well. So yeah, I've also done it in person. I do it in both. And in terms of how do they have access to it? So you can access it, the way I do it is they log in with their Microsoft credentials. So the business school, obviously we use Microsoft a lot, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, but so you may not know this, but the entire Vanderbilt University has access to the whole Microsoft 365 suite of applications. So every single student, if they're a Vanderbilt student, has access to Microsoft 365. And so I tell them just to log in with their Microsoft credentials and it goes through, it's the same, like, I think it's their Vanderbilt address and their VUNet ID password. So they don't need a new login. They don't need to create an account. You log in with those credentials and you already have access to Mural, no problem. I think I got them all.
Jesse, I wondered what was in your little video box, an entire lecture or just kind of an intro? What was that?
It was just a little intro. It was so at the beginning of the class, it's an intro to me. So it's like, here's who I am, meet your instructor. Something I might have done in person before. And then for each module, it's like a video intro to the module. Like, you know, here's what you're going to be learning today. And we're going to be talking about this. They're usually about a minute long.
All right. Thank you a lot. Julie, you want to take us away?
Yeah, so I'm also going to share my screen and I haven't done this in like a month. So Lord knows what's actually going to happen. You may end up seeing my grocery list. Oh, I don't know what you're seeing. All right, but we'll do that. So I wanted to share, there we go. Are you seeing, what are you seeing? My slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, oh, let me shrink everybody. All right, so what I was trying to do is recreate the magic of impromptu small group in-class work. And of course, I'm in the School of Engineering and Computer Science, and my class is juniors. So they're not always the most social people anyway. So in general, I put magic in quotes, but I did in class do these kind of, hey, turn to your desk partners and try this and that. Those are actually pictures from one of my old classes. And so I wanted to recreate that in Zoom as best I could. Now, if you're thinking, which happens to me when I go to a lot of these seminars, well, this doesn't apply to me because, you know, my class doesn't do small group work, or I don't have anything visual like Jesse just showed. You know, I'd encourage you to rethink your class then, because, you know, hybrid or face-to-face next year, there should be something other than you lecturing up, you know, up at the podium the whole time. So hopefully you can find some way that what we're showing you can be used in your own class. So what I tried first, it was random groups, which is pretty easy to do in Zoom. Like click a button and everybody gets shot out into a group. And after maybe doing that twice, it did not go well at all. You know, it's random. My students don't know each other that well. It's awkward, they're quiet. So then I worked on pre-assigned groups, and I did it with a lot of the same tools and caveats. You know, if you're creating groups in your class, you know, you can do friends, or I can help you meet someone or whatever. But I had to do that, which I don't normally do in face-to-face, because in face-to-face classes, they normally sit near someone they know, or at least they sit in the same about place every day. So they get to know that person. And so when I say, you know, 3 people in a cluster work on X, at least they kind of know each other. The random Zoom thing was not working at all. You know, they were thrown into these random groups, not good. So I made groups after the first week, and that worked out much better, much better. So one of the things I wanted to tackle with you today is the idea of getting people into groups, because there can be problems with it. A lot of people just didn't even try it because they heard there was problems with it. And I stumbled onto a solution because I had problems with it and they didn't go away. And so I've got it, all of this will be recorded, and I can also send you the slides. But, you know, I did my setup and I uploaded and pre-assigned my rooms, you know, doing the best I could to make sure everybody goes to their room. But of course, out of a class of 35, you know, typically 5 to 10, when I sent everybody to their pre-assigned rooms, 5 to 10 people it wouldn't work for whatever reason. It has to do with the email they're signed in under and so forth. And but it didn't work. And so how am I going to solve that? I see there's some questions in the chat. I'm going to wait and look at them in a minute. So what I ended up doing was I had a little spreadsheet. I have a little snapshot of it here. I had a spreadsheet of all of my students and the group they're supposed to be in. I think I had 14 groups, and all of them in alphabetical order, not group order, alphabetical order. And very quickly, this is what it would look like. And unfortunately, I don't have a class going right now, so I couldn't capture a live one. But when I send people to breakout rooms, if you look over here, about 5 to 10 names would show up at the top as not assigned, even though they were. So I would very quickly, one by one, you know, look at my list, my alphabetical list. Oh, he's in G. You go over there, you click on their name, drop down list. All the rooms are there, send them to G, send them to F, send them to A. So I encourage you, if you tried breakout rooms and it was the nightmare that it can be, I encourage you to consider trying it again, and being prepared for any kind of problem. And so I just shot a couple people into their rooms. The students knew it might happen. It took maybe a minute, and off they went to work. Now I'm going to show you what kind of work they did. So let me check the chat real quick and see if it's anything about, let's see. Oh, that's my question.
It's not, Julie, no questions. Okay. We're good.
So, once I got over those technical difficulties, the other issue was moving around from breakout room to breakout room. I don't know if you tried that, but there's a delay. And when you come in, then everybody else gets quiet. And I really just wanted to check on what my students are doing. Typically, I will lecture for 15 minutes, then send them into a breakout room for an activity for 15. Then I'm gonna bring them back for another 40 or 30 minutes. You know, so I have a 75-minute class. So I didn't need to be moving around to every room, but I did want to check on the students. And so what I did was I created a jam board in Google. It's similar to a whiteboard. It's not probably as fancy as what Jessie just showed you, but it's the same idea. But what I liked about it, and let me show you an actual Jamboard here, is, let's see, there we go. What I liked about it is you can create the Jamboard. Can you guys see my Jamboard, Cynthia?
Yep, we see.
Is you create a single Jamboard with multiple pages. Every student group, I'll show you all the pages, every student group is working on their own page, and I am just moving from page to page. I'm writing on the page, I'm giving them hints, and I tell them, I might put a sticky on your page. Once you've read it, go ahead and delete it and keep working. And so I was able to very quickly move throughout the work my students were doing. And again, if you don't think you have like visual work for your students to do, think again, you know, a concept map, or the Center for Teaching's got a million ideas. In this one, I had given them these sticky notes, and they had to arrange them in a particular order. And then they had to write down some answers to some of the stuff they were working on. And so you can see the students created some pretty interesting stuff. I was able to check on them. I was able to comment on their work. I gave them, you know, a green check when they got the first part done. And I never actually went into any of their rooms. And so that was much, much quicker than trying to move around the room. So that's setting up rooms in Zoom and being prepared for students who might not get into a room properly. And then creating, what I used was a multi-page whiteboard so that every group was on their own whiteboard. So here I just have some tips, you know, I had to create like, I don't know, 11 different pages every time because I had 11 groups or 14 groups. So I can create a single page and then paste my questions on it, paste the sticky notes. I made templates so that I could reuse them at every class. Like I said, I can write on the page. I can put a sticky note on the page. This is the name of the cohort. So that was already there. The students knew where to go. They could adjust the names if all the students who weren't there that day. And it just allowed me to come in and out of the class very quickly. So that was my idea of how to kind of recreate small group work when they were on Zoom. And I will say my class is a hybrid class. So about half the students are in class and half are on Zoom. Some of the small groups, they were all in the room, but since they couldn't be physically close, you know, this was fine for them anyway. Some were all in China and some were mixed. And off they went to this board. Now, will I use it when my class is fully face-to-face again? I actually kind of want to, because I want to be able to see what they're doing. I mean, I can walk around the classroom, but I'd rather just peek in on their boards. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to do it. I'll just share pretty much my disaster of class organization. I reorganized my class webpage every day up until the 5th day of class. I mean, I went even beyond class starting. Like through classes, I was still trying to fix it. I really had a hard time. And I believe my problem was I was trying to serve, you know, my remote students who never came to class, my live students, and I was using resources I had used a summer ago from a fully online course. And it just mix and match. It was very difficult. So on the right, you know, I tried to do what I learned in OCDI by doing some, you know, making some banners and, but I didn't have, it wasn't a nice checklist ordering like Jessie had, because some students didn't need all the resources. It depended on if you went to class or if you wanted to do extra credit. So here's all the resources. Then I ended up creating a separate map every module that said, you know, if you're a hybrid student, just come to class. If you're an asynchronous student, access these things in this order. So it was okay, but I've still got work to do. I don't know. It was tough, but I think the visuals at least helped a little bit. One thing I will just add, because I'm running out of time, I have it up here on this slide, is twice during this semester, I created kind of a break for the students where I laid out all their work, and then up in this upper picture, I gave them advice on how they could arrange the work to create a few continuous days with no work. Now, whether they did that or not, I'll never know. But, you know, I did a make your own fall break, And then one time I gave them an in-person exam. And if you weren't taking the exam, which half the students weren't, this is how you arrange your work. So it was something, just trying to, you know, give the kids a little break. And this year with our reading days, you might want to try something like that. So that was May.
Thank you, Julie. So you were in a situation where not only did you have some students who were remote and some students who were physically present, but you also had some students who were working asynchronously and some who were working synchronously.
Exactly.
It becomes a computational problem.
And the async was really, I mean, technically the course was synchronous, you know, get your act together, but how can you force a kid to go to online class? I mean, if they don't show, I mean, I didn't take attendance. If they're juniors, they don't show, they don't show.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the issue. Lisa, yes, everybody can see everybody else's Jamboard and they're very not secure, which some of my CS colleagues just cringe over. You know, we talked about some norms ahead of time and we were winging it and I felt like it was fine that, you know, students were kind to each other and they didn't normally clip around to their different boards. You know, they were too busy working on their own.
And Marcy might have something to offer about that too, because I think she used some similar approaches. I don't think they're what she's going to talk about, but I know she had that experience.
Mm-hmm. Also, Lisa, I would say the work I was doing was not for any kind of credit, and they were working in groups. I don't know if maybe your people were working alone and felt a little desperate to get the answer, but it was for like a participation credit, not for a correct credit. I was surprised, Hiro, I did not have any trouble with my Chinese students accessing the Jamboard. It's a Google product. I thought we were going to have problems, but we did not. No.
That's great. All right. Well, we'll come back to more questions for Julie later, but let's hear from Marcy.
Okay. Hi, everyone. All right, I am also going to share my screen if I can find the right one. And you should be looking at a slide that just says 3 emerging principles. And I'll just quickly, I had, let's see, 8, I'm going to focus on a course on inquiry that I taught last semester. They were primarily first semester master's students. I had 18. From week to week, about 11 to 14 were remote. And the others were in person. And this is about the flip of what I'm expecting this spring with my undergraduates. So I'm still playing with these ideas, but these 3 kind of ideas emerge for me as being really important, and you'll see how they played out in the tools that I chose. So one was this idea of connected people, keeping things really small. The second was the idea of connecting resources and providing redundant access to students for the things that they needed for class each time. And then this connected everything, like doggedly mapping where we were in the course, how pieces fit together and how they built on one another. And taken together, I think those things were really, really helpful in our all sort of learning in this very weird hybrid environment. So let me talk first about keeping things small. I did it in 2 ways. One was structurally and how I organized time. And then the other was in thinking about sort of the work inside the work that we did together. So very quickly, the keeping things small, I approached, initially we tried to do, our class meets for 3 hours. Initially, I sort of thought of everybody going through the same thing. And one of the things that became really clear to, I think, many of us in the spring was that relationships were absolutely everything. And to know my students as learners, I needed to be able to think with them and hear with them in sustained ways. And that was really difficult when I was trying to look at people in the classroom, look at people online, all at the same time. And even in a small class like 18 students, people can hide. And it was also really important for students themselves to be connected and have relationships with one another. And so I needed to make sure they could hear each other. So what you're looking at on this screen is an agenda, sort of 2 sample agendas. In one of them, I divided the students, how they proceeded through the 3 hours depended on whether they were on campus or not. In the one on the right, you'll see it depended on, they were doing some kind of very mini presentations. And you'll notice that essentially I met each, if you were in the presentation round one group, you started out with presentations, and then you went into the whole group convening where we had kind of a discussion, interactive lecturette thing on race, ethnicity, power, and epistemology and research. And then they went off and they began to work on tasks that they needed to get done for the next session. This was very much of a project-oriented session. There were others where I did a similar kind of flip, sort of half of the class does one thing, we come together for a period of time, and then they flip and they go off and do something on their own. But the point is that I was able to be then with half the class and to be able to pay attention to their thinking in much closer ways. And they were also able to see one another. And I can talk a little bit more about this later if people would like to see, but this was really helpful for me to begin to break out the sessions. Students also really liked it. After we did it for the first time, I got so many emails from students saying, thank you. It was really, really helpful for us to be able to work in and navigate and think with you in smaller groups. The second way that I kept things small was drawing, and I'm not going to go into much depth on this, was tapping into the Liberating Structures tool. I really recommend that you go and you check them out if you haven't. Essentially, Liberating Structures are these protocols and ways of organizing small group work. They map everything out. They provide some images, some tools, and literally they provide the directions. But what they help, they structure conversations that might be analytical, that might be deliberative, that might be creative. And I found that these structures really help students to slow down, think carefully and closely about the work that we were doing and the readings that we were doing, and then to, essentially connect with one another and really hear one another. So those small groups began to develop relationships with one another in ways that I hadn't heard before. Like Julie and Jesse, I had students record on common documents. And Lisa, I didn't have so much trouble with the students sort of copying each other. Part of it was that I actually was then, when they were working in breakout groups, I did drop in and out. Sometimes I kept my video off, but they could see that I had come in. And I think that they felt like an accountability. And for whatever reason, they also felt like they wanted to be creative. We'll see whether the undergraduates are similar in the spring, but it was not an issue that I had much. There was also an accountability that they knew that when they had small group work, and we weren't going to have a full class debriefing afterward, they knew that I was going to pick up pieces from their small group work and carry it forward into the next session. So you'll see written in blue, here I've just said we'll draw from takeaways to frame discussion of key themes and questions for next week. So that was the second, those were the, how did I what helped me support active learning? I would say it was keeping things small in those two ways. The second, how did I help kids keep track, was this idea of connected resources and redundant access. And let's see, can I drop something into the chat from here? I think I can. I'm going to drop a link, which is the link to this session agenda. I can actually bring it up here. But essentially, every week I had a session agenda in which I had links to everything that they were going to need for that week. Are you looking at this shared Google Doc now? I'm hoping you are.
Yes, yes we are.
Okay. Okay, and so you'll see that the agenda had a link to the session slides. It had a link when they were doing presentations, there was a listener feedback form, which each person had essentially their own section, and people went in and they filled in responses to them. They had, and then if they were doing small groups getting ready for their research, they had, you know, again, they had the resources that they needed. If there was any small group work, I listed how the small groups would be made up. If I was planning, there were some different directions for the small groups, but essentially this anchoring Google Doc was incredibly helpful for them. And what I found was that some of the disengagement, I'd never realized this before, was because students just didn't even know where they were supposed to be sometimes, or what resource they were supposed to be using. So they knew they needed the Google Doc. The link to the agenda showed up. I posted it in the announcements. I posted it in Brightspace in my section where they would link to the Zoom. I would always have the link there, and then I also sent an email. So just amazing redundancy. This also then I attached it then belatedly to the syllabus. And the reason that I did that was because I also wanted them to keep coming back to the links that we were making between everything and to begin to see how all these pieces fit together. So this third piece around connected everything, kind of doggedly mapping, so they could see how a theoretical reading linked to an applied reading, linked to what we were doing in class, and linked to an assignment, and then how the assignment pushed back up. And I will just flash one last thing because I think I am way over my time. That essentially helping students constantly see where we were and how they could draw from something we had done to inform something they were about to do was another way that was really helpful, and lots. So I used lots and lots of visuals, and I will continue to do this. One of my students suggested that rather than having only my syllabus listing where I've got sort of the typical week by week, read this is the topic, here's what you have assigned. They suggested that I actually start providing these kinds of maps for students so that they can see. So just very quickly so you can make sense of this. In the darker blue, there are theoretical, there are kind of our core topics. In the gray are more theoretical pieces. In the light blue are sort of case examples or enactments of that. Of those theoretical ideas, and then each of these arrows connect into I show how they can draw from certain assignments to help them think about particular assignments. So the community, these bright green were the tasks that they had to do through the course. And again, they found those mapping structures incredibly helpful. So that's what I did.
I love that. So Marcy, is that something that map, did you build that?
I did build it, and I later, after I had done one of those, I began to have them do that kind of thing as we got later on. But this, I think I created that map about 4 weeks in, and they were beginning to get worried about their final assignment, and they just said, we just don't know why we're doing X. And so I was like, but I've been telling you, and it's so clear. And then I realized, no, it's not. So I made that, and then they just like breathed a sigh of relief.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
So
those visual depictions like that are so valuable. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I want to encourage you all to turn on your videos if you can, and let us know what questions you have, what thoughts this brings up for you, for how this relates to your own classes. I'll be watching the chat, and so if you can't turn your microphone on because your kids are like leaping around on a trampoline beside you, I'll read your question out.
So I can start. So the thing that I'm most worried about for the spring is, how do I deal with and engage students who are both on Zoom and in person at the same time? I taught online only in the fall and it worked great, but this like weird combo where they're both, and just the logistics of like, for breakout rooms, do you have every student in the classroom also on a computer and then randomize across? And just any tips you have on kind of making sure neither group gets left out of kind of good pedagogy.
Lisa, that was exactly what I was trying to respond to when I gave to make sure that I had small group time with students as well as whole group time, was because I was really worried about the students who weren't in the majority. And I did actually, everybody by the fourth session in, everybody was always on Zoom. And that way we could move in and out. And then they could also see each other's faces. So that was really important to be able to do. And we had to play around with the audio to make sure that we didn't get lots of interference.
Actually, Marcy, on that, can you say how you dealt with the interference? But then also, I'm just curious, I got some feedback from a student that they so valued not having to be on a device some of the time, that part of the problem is they just get, as we all know, they get fatigued. I mean, we all get fatigued with the online. So I've been hesitant to have the in-person students be on Zoom too, because of that. Like they don't get a break, especially because presumably some of their classes are online. But then there's that more pragmatic of how did you deal with the sound issues if they're logged into Zoom? I've really been struggling with this for in-person students to be logged into Zoom.
Yeah, so on the practical side, they figured out that if they didn't, on the days we were in a room where sometimes the classroom audio worked and sometimes it didn't. On the days that it worked, they went into Zoom in their audio settings and they signed out of the audio thing. I forget exactly what the language is there, but if you go into audio settings, you can disconnect your audio so that you're not using audio to connect. And that's what they did. And that solved the interference problem. We all had to do that for the in-person people. Otherwise, they just learned to be really careful with putting themselves on mute, and they had earbuds. In terms of the fatigue, I found that the students who were in the room weren't looking at their screens a lot of the time. They had it up, they had the device up, and they were able to use it when they were working on tasks. But generally, it was their attention was up and out and looking at one another. So it didn't seem to be such an issue.
And you didn't have equity issues with some students not having laptops?
No, I didn't. Everybody had them, which surprised me because the master's students who I was teaching are not generally really well resourced, but they all had them. And I think, yeah.
We're probably at a point where you can get a Chromebook or something pretty cheap. So thanks.
I think that Julie tried a different approach to engage her remote students and her in-person students. I think she would divide her class session and have one class session for people who were physically there, and so 45 minutes, and then a 45-minute session for the people who are virtually there. So Julie, can you tell us if I'm right? And
yeah, I did that a couple times because I have a 75-minute class. I can't imagine with a 50, that wouldn't work. But with the 75-minute, you can do it so there's 20 minutes in between the two sections. And the in-person people, it's funny, the in-person people, they were nonplussed. Okay, that's fine. But the online people realized, oh yeah, this, I think like Marcy had said, this is much better with just 11 of us all on the screen at one time, you know, so, and I was able to answer individual questions. So I tried all sorts of things. I had a workshop one night. I created some pre-recorded videos so you didn't have to come to class. And then the people who did, we were online only that day, which, like I said, sounds almost worse, but I found that if you're going to be in a hybrid class anyway, Bethany, sometimes it's better to get everybody's face on there. So, and of course, one of the early things is just surveying your students. You know, where are you? Are you going to come to class if you don't require it? You know, so you can get a feel for who's going to be where. And from time to time, if you see fatigue developing, particularly if you have younger students, see if you can do, okay, today is online only, or 45 minutes of face-to-face and 45 of online, come to whichever, to try to create these breaks. And it's extra work. It's extra work. Sorry, Jesse. I mean, it's extra work. Everything we've been doing this year is extra work, but you know, you got to try something.
It is, yeah. I was just going to say, I did the same thing that Julie did in that I had the ability to basically just divide my classes in half. So I mean, I think the hybrid thing and trying to do it together is the single biggest challenge as far as I'm concerned. That's the big one. I can teach online, I can teach in person, I can teach in person with masks, but trying to do it at the same time that's the big, to me, that's the biggest challenge. And so I just avoided it because I could, and I don't know that everybody can, but I literally took every single one of my classes and cut them in half. And I did basically, it's like having different sections, right? I did one section fully online, one section fully in person, and then I never had to deal with the same thing at the same time. And I'm doing it right now. And that's really the only way I want to do it.
And what I hear from that is that the extra work is worth it to you because you're making the same choice again.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like you're going to have extra work regardless. It's a matter of how are you going to do the extra work and what challenges do you want to face? So, you know, I didn't want to face the technological and pedagogical challenges of trying to have half the class online, half the class in person. Because mostly it depends also on your pedagogy, right? So a lot of my classes have interaction among the students, right? So they're more like discussion classes where I want to get the students involved and I want to get them talking. And that's honestly really hard to do if they're in person with a mask on Zoom, even in the best audio circumstances. That's difficult. You know, I mean, imagine if we all put on masks right now and you're all talking to Zoom and you can hear me kind of like this because I have a mask on, right? It's hard. And so in order to get the students interacting with each other, I felt like it was worth it to try to adjust for that setup.
Divya, I wanted to let us know, she let students, in-class students join via their phones if they didn't have a laptop on that day. And she directed students to the hardship fund in her syllabus. So in case they didn't have what they needed, you know, they had direction to that resource right there in the materials for the class. We've got a question from Lisa. We've got a question from Erica. Got a question from Hiroyo. So may I ask y'all to speak up and ask those questions?
Yeah, so I'll go. My original plan for the spring was to do something like what Jesse was talking about, where kind of I would split the class time into two sections, and for part of it I would be dealing with in-person students, and for part of it I'd be dealing with the remote students. But I feel like we've gotten a lot of pressure this spring that the in-person students should be in person for the entire class time. And so I don't know if that's kind of an acceptable thing to do this spring. If they're in person for 75 minutes twice a week, they should be physically in the classroom twice a week for 75 minutes.
Yeah, but is your room big enough, Lisa, for all the in-person people to be in there anyway? I mean, oh, it is. Ah.
It is. They cut my class size so that it would fit in the room, just barely.
Then you might want to look at what Marcy did, which is, I mean, they're there, right, Marcy? They were there doing other things. So everybody was in class, but the activities. And Marcy, did you go to like a quieter place to do your, interact with the online students at that moment, or?
I did. I found that it worked better when I was able to do that. I wasn't always able to, but yeah, I would sneak off to my office and, you know, like I would map the transitions into a break. And so I would run off to my office and then I would run back down to the classroom, and they were fine with that.
That seems like, Lisa, you know, to your point, that seems like that is absolutely in line with engaging students the entire 75 minutes, right? So half of it, they're doing one thing, half with you, half of it, they're doing something else with each other, but it's still absolutely, you know, the case that they're being engaged the whole class time.
Yeah, and they're in person and they're accountable. So, I mean, really, I should share some of the tasks that I mean, the structures. It took a lot of time to write out the directions to make sure that they had places where they had to fill in and comment. But they always had to produce something during those sessions, and they always had to produce something that actually showed some thought. And I gave them feedback. Like they would often sometimes I would give them rubrics, you know, of this is what a good response looks like.
So Erica, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to read it for you?
Oh, I'm fine with that. It's been kind of answered. You know, Jesse
Okay.
answered a little bit lower. You know, he went with asynchronous with some stuff, and you know, Marcy's talking about what she did, and Julie's talking about what she did. So, I mean, I feel like things are pretty much answered. I will say that for the lecture that I'll be teaching this time, they put me in 4309, which is the biggest room, and I have, you know, 45 students, and like they can all fit. Or like it's almost all fit. So yeah, even though I know I have some remote, I already know that I have some remote. So yeah.
I ended up pushing some things to the asynchronous, either because I was doing a split class, or like I said, I did some in-person exams, which took an entire week to get everybody through. And I got some criticism from the students, you know, we have so much outside work to do. But again, I think they were just spoiled. In computer science, normally there's no reading, you know, there's no researching, there's just programming. Well, now they had reading to do. They didn't like that. But I still watched my hour requirement. It wasn't any more than a history student's doing. But your students might not be used to doing some work on their own. I mean, mine obviously weren't.
That was a common observation that we got. So at the CFT, we did some focus groups with mostly A&S students in the fall, and their perception was that they were doing much more work. But when we talked to faculty members, said, no, this is the same amount of work that they were always supposed to do. But now it's more visible. And so I think that students perceive it as extra work. And that's been, you know, reported at universities across the country. So I think Julie's right. We have to be conscious. We have to keep track. We can't overload them. We need to make sure that the work that we're doing is meaningful to them. So I think Marcy's visual map illustrating why they're doing everything that they're doing is super important. Well, there are other ways one could do it. It's a really good way to make it obvious to them why the things matter. So that can help with their perception that they're doing work that is extra or is not meaningful. We need to keep an eye on that.
Well, I also try to be very clear about what I was doing with that, where I would say, like, you know, hey, pre-COVID, what I would do is I would give you this exercise and you would run through this exercise and then I would go over it with you. And now what I've done is I've just put it on Brightspace and I need you to do it ahead of class, right? And so it's like, and I can talk to my dean or whoever is maybe worried about me not having as much face-to-face time. And I can say, look, here's my class plan. Here's how I spent my 75 minutes before. And now this chunk is right here in Brightspace. And this chunk down here is how I'm spending that 45 minutes, right? So it's, in terms of content, it's all right there that I'm doing the same things. It's just, you know, I can, you know, it's easy to do something asynchronous where you give them, you know, here's a spreadsheet. I want you to do these things and then watch this video of me going over it. Right? I mean, it's the same thing as they would be doing in class.
Hiroyo asked Marcy what tool she used for the concept map activity. Marcy, you said you've used Mind Map, Lucidchart, Google Draw. Do you have thoughts about which ones are more user-friendly or more effective?
No, I mean, Google Draw is the easiest and the most clunky. My students actually figured out Lucidchart really quickly. And I think 2 of them tried Mind Map. I love Mind Map, but if you get to a certain point, you have to, and it links into Google, you know, so like you can open it from Google, but but at a certain point they make you pay. Like $25 for the year for the gold version if you want to start saving very much. So that was, so that I didn't ask my students to buy it, but the Lucidchart like mural you can get free, and I mean educators and students can use free, and it's really, really flexible. So.
That was kind of along the lines of a question I had. How many of these things speak to each other, especially for redundancy when you're trying to put key things in multiple places. How many of these tools helped you save time because you were of the extra work that you're putting in? Or would you recommend a certain cluster of tools because they could easily update each other or sync or speak the same language?
Yeah. So one thing, Bryn, that you're raising, which I think is really important, is it's real. Don't use a lot of tools. Like choose, and then for me, staying primarily within Google Suites was useful. But again, for the mind mapping kind of stuff, which I do a lot of, I mean, I really do, I find it very useful to have students work on visualizing things and sort of connect and seeing connections. Again, I really liked Lucidchart, and it was always easy to place a link inside a Google slide or a Google Doc out to Lucidchart. So most of all of the tools that I used, that you could put a link into them and then a student could go and open it up or work on it. Does that answer your question?
I think we have maybe one more question. So Yogesh asked about options for student course discussions in an offline setting, such as Piazza.
Well, Piazza's going to a pay model. I don't know if you've heard that. So we're really kind of disappointed there, but we're still working through that. I have struggled with the Brightspace discussion board, just the mechanics of it, but I have had some success with it, and it is, you know, integrated in there. And so, you know, I've had some luck. But one of the other things for undergrads that I definitely did with the discussion board after going through the OCDI with the center is giving students guidance on what you expect of them in the discussion board. I think you guys have a bunch of resources for that, right, Cynthia?
Mm-hmm.
Because I was surprised how students either answered every question so that no other student could say anything, it was worthless, or, you know, they would just parrot each other. So it took a lot of work. We do like Piazza in the computer science department, and we are going to figure out a way to pay for the $9,000 license next year. It is a very good tool. And I think a lot of students are used to it.
Mm. Yeah, Lisa pointed out she used Slack as a discussion board space. And we had last week, there was a CFT session on using Slack and similar tools. I have not used it as a discussion tool in class, but boy, I think it would be great. And Microsoft Teams as well. I think either one could work super well.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention those as well. I use them more for communication with students, actually. I use Teams and Slack to help communicate outside of class. I've not used them in the context of discussion boards.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about Marcy mentioning tools, we had a discussion in our department, is this yet one more tool, you know, Slack or Teams? But those are things used in the workplace. Mm-hmm. So if you teach your students how to use them, that is not for naught.
Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone for being here. This was a lot of fun to hear your questions and ideas. And I really want to thank Marcy, Julie, and Jesse. Those were super things for you all to share. I appreciate it a lot. And, this is recorded, so I will post it to the CFT website, and I will send you all a follow-up email with a link to it. And I will include in that Lisa Fazio's email in case you have questions about Peerceptive, because I forgot to get us back to talking about Peerceptive in this time. So thank you all very much. And we will see you in 2021 sometime.